Hello, it's me once again, the high priest of the Economicon, the Economancer. My life's work is to show you the sacred passages of the Economicon in a digestible form. So today we're going to be discussing the economic base model. The economic base theory, also known as the export base model, is what happens in the most egregious anime crossover with geography and economics that literally no one asked for. This simple but effective model of local economic growth and development has been powerful enough to persuade almost every local chamber of commerce to use it. I mean, it's bordering on the absurd how often this is used. So, first, let's explain what the model is. So, the economic base theory model states that the growth and development of a local economy is driven by the external demand for the local products. Cool. Wow. Words. Yes. So, what are the local products and what constitutes the external demand? Well, a prominent example is Detroit, Michigan, and auto manufacturing. So, the cars are what is externally demanded, and then that's considered the economic base. And there you have the car manufacturers that are the drivers of the growth and development, and also the drivers of the complete and utter destruction. So this gives us an idea of the basic sector. But what else is there? I mean, we've named the basic sector, but there's got to be more to it than that. What could it be? Let's take a guess. The non-basic sector. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's wordplay on par with Lil Wayne. So this is the local market that has an internal demand. So these like internally demanded products can be, the amazingness of energy drinks, Starbucks for why, and laundromats because white shirts get very dirty when you eat pizza all the time. Probably why I'm overweight. Now, where did this amazingly simple model come from? Well, the answer isn't really simple. In my estimation, this model is not a stretch of the imagination, and like a less formulaic representation has been used throughout most of history, whether it's written or pre. And the thing about this is like, all right, so when you started having conglomerations of agricultural uh, land coming together to come to towns, villages, and even cities, you obviously had a main exporter there, and everything else kind of facilitated it. Now, the more rigorous and formulaic expression of this, as early as I've found, goes back to John Alexander in 1954 in his paper, The Basic Non-Basic Concept of Urban Economic Functions. Now, earlier I made a statement about how regional economic developers use this almost entirely, but academic economists really, really hate this model, specifically those who study regional economic development. So let's talk about why it would be a preferred model for individuals as a regional economic developer. So some of the key features is one, that it's a fairly simple model, as kind of given earlier. Second, it's just a basic Keynesian model. It even has its own little multiplier that we'll end up deriving at the end of this video. It has demand as the primary function of the economy, and similar to some of Keynesian's work, such as the Keynesian cross, it's pretty easy to grasp algebraically. Another key feature of this is that in the short run, this tends to be one of the better models for forecasting regional economic growth. All right, so that begs the question, why do academics hate it so much? First and foremost, academics tend to be complete perfectionist jerks. Don't need to apply any more logic to that. Second, some of the assumptions of the model are really dubious. An example is that it lacks supply side considerations, which is kind of hilarious to me because, like, the bulk of the growth and development literature in macroeconomics is primarily focused on supply side and institutionalism. Also, it assumes no significant production capacity constraints. So these are factors that prevent a firm from achieving more output. So basically, every company becomes Amazon. Obviously, this is true, and those pesky entrepreneurs and their high failure rates, they're just silly. It's their fault. Duh. We'll get to that. So another criticism of economic-based theory is that it puts a lot of eggs in the basket of development versus growth. Now, there's plenty of arguments to be made that these are one and the same, but typically we consider, growth as the quantitative change and development as the qualitative change, even though there is some crossover. But if you're a regional economic developer or growth guy, because you're not even worrying about development, you're worrying about growth. You're really focusing on growing the economy. Now, this doesn't always work out too well. As I talked about with, Detroit, Michigan, one of the fundamental problems is that they worried a lot about growth, and they did not have that underpinning development that, after the fall of some of the plants and their economic base, that they couldn't, bounce back from it, which they have in many ways, but that, that issue lasted for quite some time. So this brings me to my last point. Remember those pesky entrepreneurs I was talking about? Well, if you're a regional economic developer, you're really focusing on this basic sector model, but you're not really giving much thought to, your entrepreneurship. Now, there's reasonings behind this. One of those is that the research and development spillover into the local and regional economy from, that basic sector does increase human capital in total. That is true. But we have to think about it this way. There are spillover effects that happen from entrepreneurs because, if they're coming in, they have new and innovative technology and techniques, which may significantly be more efficient. And since we have these, economic developers, they're basically just salespeople. They're trying to drag in, everybody that kind of fits into their base, and they're kind of molding the economy around that base. They're really not worrying about the innovation, right? And so that causes like a social welfare loss. And it also causes, when that base does leave, what are they going to do? They're not being dynamic enough and worrying about the long run. They're trying to gain as much as they can in that short run, which obviously has downsides, as we've seen in multiple, ghost towns that had economic bases, and then that economic base left, and then that entire town just went to dust. So, a lot of these regional economic developers, because they're not giving a fair shake and they're not worrying enough about these entrepreneurs, they're really missing out on some key aspects of increasing, total factor productivity as well as, human capital. So there are more advanced economic-based theory models, and they include some dynamic changes as well as increasing or adding in some production capacity constraints. And then they work on the differential impacts of the spillover effects between entrepreneurship and the research and development, and kind of trying to see where that is, brings about the maximal amount of social welfare. However, that is a bit beyond the scope of this video. This is something I will tackle later on. However, I want to do some quick maths. So we're going to derive the economic base model. So this is the regional employment multiplier. This is a real simple breakdown. I am the Economancer, and this is from the pages of the Economicon. This is very direct, so you have to like, share, and subscribe because I'm letting you into this, dismal art. All right, so I'm going to be the worst professor you've ever had, and I'm going to read off the slide. All right, X is the basic industry employment, N is the non-basic industry of employment, E is the total employment. Now, B is the fraction of employment where we have the non-basic over the total employment. Then we have M, that's our regional employment multiplier. That's what we're trying to derive in this model. So we have M is equal to 1 over 1 minus this fraction of employment, right? And so we have this E equals X plus N. That's your total employment is equal to the basic and then the non-basic. So we're going to substitute that B in because we're going to do a little math trickery. All right, so now we're going to suppose that our basic industry is 600 and our total employment is 1,000. So it follows that 1,000 equals 600 plus B times 1,000. We do a little bit of switcheroo. We have 1,000 times 1 minus B is equal to 600. We divide that operation by 1,000, then we get 1 minus B is equal to 0.6. Now we're trying to find that 1 over 1 minus B. So we're going to inverse the operations on both sides. That's going to give us 1 over 1 minus B is equal to 1.6 continuous, the number of the B's. Now, we can check this by having K, which is equal to the total employment over the base model. Now, what does this say? What does this tell us? Well, first of all, we know if we have 600 jobs in the base sector, that's going to give us 400 jobs in the non-basic sector. So that means there's a 2/3 support from the basic to the non-basic. All right. So what does this tell us for policy implications as a leader? Now, this typically means that I want to build my economic base as big as possible. So I'm going to add in, economic developers are going to go out there and be the salespeople that I need them to be to bring in these, these industries. I'm going to want to try to manipulate my economy around this so I can, build up my infrastructure for them. All of these aspects that are going to go into regional economic development. Now, what does this tell us here? Well, we can think about it this way. At the end of the day, those policy implications are typically carried out. But how does that function in the real world? Well, not as great all the time, even though a lot of regional economic developers utilize this model. But those constraining functions that I was talking about earlier and the criticisms of it need to be addressed by, regional economic developers as well as, your city council, your metropolitan statistical area needs to all come together and try to come up with better ideas to integrate this model. Now, I am the Economancer, and I hope you've enjoyed this and learned something from it. Please like, share, subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.